Hey there, everybody. Welcome. We are in the middle of a series called A Man After God's Own Heart, the life of David in the Bible, and we're talking about King David. Today is part 21, so we've covered a lot of ground here in the last month or so. So you may want to go back and read, or listen rather, to what we've done already. Today is a big day. It's a monumentous day for David. He had been anointed king as a teenage boy, and now he is 30 years of age. I guess he's about 37 years of age here. And so 20 years have passed. You know, we think that God's going to move overnight in our lives, and He just doesn't work that way. God moves and He shows up when He wants to move and show up, and our job is to be patient, to trust, and to wait on Him. So, if you want to read along with us, I encourage you to do so. If it's safe for you to do so, 2 Samuel chapter number 5 in your Bibles. I hope you'll turn there and read along. 2 Samuel 5, verse number 1. Then came all the tribes of Israel to David unto Hebron, and spake, saying, Behold, we are thy bone and thy flesh. Also in time past, when Saul was king over us, thou wast he that led us out and broughtest in Israel. And the Lord said to thee, Thou shalt feed my people Israel, and thou shalt be a captain over Israel. So all the elders of Israel came to the king in Hebron, and King David made a league with them in Hebron before the Lord, and they anointed David king over Israel. So, brief recap to bring us up to speed of what's happening here. David was anointed to be the king of Israel once the death of Saul occurred, but then the death of Saul occurs, and a man named Abner interferes and takes Saul's son Ishbosheth and puts him on the throne in Israel at Jerusalem. And David then is just the king of the tribe of Judah, and he does that for 7.5 years before Ishbosheth is assassinated by two guys, Baanah and Rechab. They are in chapter 4 of 2 Samuel. We talked about that just yesterday. So now that Ishbosheth is dead, the rest of the tribes of Israel come to Hebron, where David has been living and ruling, and they say, We know that you're God's man to lead our country. When Saul was the king, you handled business for us, you protected us and watched out over us, you were loyal to the king, and now we're coming to you, and we want you to be our king. And so David agrees to do so. They anoint him the king. David was 30 years old when he began to reign, and he reigned 40 years. In Hebron he reigned over Judah 7 years and 6 months, and in Jerusalem he reigned 30 and 3 years over all Israel and Judah. And so that's where I was discussing just a minute ago the timeline. So David was 30 years old when he began to reign. That was when he was reigning over Judah in Hebron. Now he is reigning over all Israel, so he's 37.5 years old. It's said here in verse 5, in Hebron he reigned over Judah 7 years and 6 months, and in Jerusalem he reigned 30 and 3 years over all Israel and Judah. So he's 7.5 years into his reign, and now he's got 33 years to go. So think of this again. Let's even say that it was 17 when he was anointed to be king. And I happen to think it was a little bit earlier. We don't know exactly when, but if you know that David has 7 older brothers, and that 2 or 3 of them, I forget how many, were off to war when Goliath was in the valley of Elah, and David was sent to check on them, all of the brothers would have gone to fight more than likely. And the fact that there were only 2 or 3 tells us that the ages are staggered. Now, even if David's mother had 1 son a year, then that would push him back toward 14, 15 years of age, since you had to be 20 years of age to be able to fight as an Israelite. So we don't know exactly when he was anointed to be king, but could have been as young as 13, 14, 15 years of age, perhaps. So let's call it 17, though, just for the sake of the math. And I think it was longer than, or previous to then, but let's just call it that. So he's 17 years old when he's anointed to be king by Samuel at his father's house, and now he becomes the king at 37. That's 20 years. You think of Joseph and the time that he waited as a servant in Potiphar's house, and then serving in the prison when he was locked up after being falsely accused. You look at the lengths of time that pass. And we can be very impatient people. We can be very hasty people. And we can rush God in his timeline, and we shouldn't do that. We should trust that God's timing is the best, and we ought to just be patient and carry out our work and do what we're supposed to do as we wait on the Lord to show up. And so 20 years pass from the time he was anointed until the time he is made king, and God came through in his promise yet again. Verse 6. And the king and his men went to Jerusalem unto the Jebusites, the inhabitants of the land, which spake unto David, saying, Except thou take away the blind and the lame, thou shalt not come in hither, thinking David cannot come in hither. Nevertheless, David took the stronghold of Zion, the same is the city of David. And David said on that day, Whosoever getteth up to the gutter, and smiteth the Jebusites, and the lame and the blind, that are hated of David's soul, he shall be chief and captain. Wherefore they said, The blind and the lame shall not come into the house. So David dwelt in the fort, and called it the city of David. And David built round about from Millo and inward. And David went on, and grew great, and the Lord God of hosts was with him. So this is the second portion of the chapter here. The first portion is him being anointed as king, and his tenure of 40 years of reign laid out for us. Now we see that David goes to Jerusalem, and the Jebusites had invaded that city and had occupied that land. And so we're going to see David go to take it back. Now listen to what they say to him. Let's see. Except thou take away the blind and the lame, thou shalt not come in hither. Thinking David cannot come in hither. Now, what does that mean? Blind people and lame or crippled people, handicapped people. What does it mean that he has to take them away first? Well, the fortress here in Jerusalem was so safe and so fortified that they thought it was nearly impenetrable. So much so that instead of using regular men to guard the city, they put blind men at the posts, and they put crippled men at the posts, so that they would have a function and a purpose. And so they say, unless you can come kill these blind and lame men, you won't come in, thinking David cannot come in hither. The Jebusites truly believed there was no possible way for David to be able to take their city. Now, they didn't know David very well, because he indeed does that. But this is a tremendous insult. First off, it's an insult by not putting regular guards in place. Then it's an insult to put blind guards in place and dare you to come take them out. And to say that there is no possible way for you to defeat them and invade the city is just a huge backhanded slap across the face of David. And this is a way to mock him. So David says, you know what? You guys get up there. This whosoever getteth up to the gutter. I think there was some sort of aquifer system of transporting water around the city. We don't know exactly what it means, but he says, hey, whoever can get up there and then can kill the blind and the lame, then I'm going to go ahead and make you a captain. So they said, the blind and the lame shall not come into the house. So they do invade the city. They take out easily the blind and lame guards that are there. They run the Jebusites out of the fort and out of Jerusalem, and David makes that his home base. And now Jerusalem is called the city of David, and David went on and grew great. So that's the second part of the chapter. His invasion of Jerusalem to drive out the Jebusites, who had no belief that he could do so, and even mocked him in the process, and he does it handily without issue. Verse number 11, And Hiram, king of Tyre, sent messengers to David, and cedar trees, and carpenters, and masons, and they built David an house. So Hiram and Tyre has always been good to David and to the people of Israel, even with other kings. And so they were allies in a sense, and Hiram decides to bless his new friend, his new king, neighbor, by building him a house, and so he does that for David. And David perceived that the Lord had established him king over Israel, and that he exalted his kingdom for his people Israel's sake. And so David recognizes now that God's hand is on him. Took a while, didn't it? Took over 20 years to get him here, but now he finally realizes that God is faithful, and he's proven himself by putting him here. And I love the last section of verse 12. It says that God had exalted his kingdom for his people Israel's sake. You know, God sometimes blesses you so that you can be a blessing to others. He doesn't just mean for you to hold it all for yourself or to hoard it unto yourself. He means to bless you so that you can be a help and a blessing to other people. Now we see a mistake, a sin even. Verse 13, David took him more concubines and wives out of Jerusalem. So far, at this point, we only know of David having 3 wives. Michal, who had been taken from him by Saul, had now been returned to him by Ishbosheth, and then Ahinoam, the Jezreelitess, and then Abigail, the wife of Nabal. So those were the 3 that we knew of, but now we see more concubines and wives after he was come from Hebron, and there were yet sons and daughters born to David. And these be the names of those that were born unto him in Jerusalem: Shemua, and Shobab, and Nathan, and Solomon. Ibhar also, and Elishua, and Nepheg, and Japhiah, and Elishama, and Eliada, and Eliphalet. So those are the names of some of David's children with these new wives. Now I say it's a sin. Deuteronomy, I think it's chapter 17, God said that kings should not amass themselves great wealth and great number of wives. And David is doing that anyhow. And this is going to be something that leads to his downfall with Bathsheba. He has this lustful heart. He desires beautiful women, and so he breaks up a marriage, impregnates a lady outside of wedlock, has her husband killed to cover it all up. We know the story of David and Bathsheba, and we'll get to it as we progress. And then we also know that Solomon, his son, is going to follow after his father's footsteps, but where David had a certain number of wives, Solomon ends up with 700 wives and 300 concubines, 1,000 women, very unwisely. And so David sort of got that ball rolling here. Now, verse 17, the final section of the chapter, the Philistines. While David and Saul were warring, and David and Ishbosheth were warring, the Philistines pretty much left Israel alone. I shouldn't say that regarding Saul as much. There were a couple times God brought them to invade to get Saul away from David, but certainly during the time of David and Ishbosheth, that civil war, if you will, that internal conflict, Philistines just left him alone. But now that David's in charge and he's trying to set everything up, Philistines show up. But when the Philistines heard that they had anointed David king over Israel, all the Philistines came up to seek David, and David heard of it and went down to the hold. The Philistines also came and spread themselves in the valley of Rephaim. And here's more wisdom from David. We've seen him do this before. And David inquired of the Lord, saying, Shall I go up to the Philistines? Wilt thou deliver them into mine hand? And the Lord said unto David, Go up, for I will doubtless deliver the Philistines into thy hand. And David came to Baal-perazim, and David smote them there, and said, The Lord hath broken forth upon mine enemies before me, as the breach of waters. Therefore he called the name of that place Baal-perazim. And there they left their images, and David and his men burned them. And so the Philistines make their first effort to come and disrupt the kingdom of David. David inquires of the Lord, Should I go up and fight them? It's a good idea before you go into war with someone that you ask God if that's what you ought to do. And he says, yes, go. And so they go up and they defeat them. And that verse 21 says, there they left their images, and David and his men burned them. Whereas he violated the law of God earlier by amassing many wives, here he's going to obey the word of God and the law of God. The Philistines would bring their false idols to the battle site with them, thinking that those idols would fight on their behalf. And of course, they're nothing but stone. And so God defeats the Philistines and uses David and the army to do so. And once the Philistines are run out, David and his men destroy and burn those false idols, which is what the Old Testament law told them to do. And the Philistines, not giving up easily, show up again. The Philistines came up yet again and spread themselves in the valley of Rephaim. And when David inquired of the Lord, he said, "Thou shalt not go up." Good thing that he didn't just go on his own. Well, last time God had me go up, so I'll go up again. No, every single instance, David checks in with the Lord. More good advice there. More good principles to follow. Don't just take things for granted. Seek the Lord's direction in every step that you make. So God tells him not to go up, but fetch a compass behind them and come up upon them over against the mulberry trees. So David is told, wait until they come into place, and then you're going to go around and flank them. And let it be, when thou hearest the sound of a going in the tops of the mulberry trees, that then thou shalt bestir thyself. For then shall the Lord go out before thee to smite the host of the Philistines. And David did so as the Lord had commanded him, and smote the Philistines from Geba until thou come to Gazer. And so, in this particular battle plan, God often gave his people battle plans. Think of Jericho and marching around the city and that type of thing. Gideon with the pots and the lanterns. David is told by God, wait. But then, come nightfall, flank them and go around behind them. And then, when you hear sound in the mulberry trees, the wind rustling, very still up until then, but when you hear the wind rustle, then go in and attack, and I'll be with you, and David wins the victory. So a couple good takeaways there. Obey the law of God. Don't marry a bunch of women, and that's just the example here. Number 2, make sure you check in with the Lord before you make any moves. And number 3, trust God's timeline. Don't rush anything. God will do what he's promised he will do in his good time. All right, that's all that I got for you today. Thanks so much for watching. God bless you. Have a wonderful day.